Shrek theory.
I just posted on my Instagram story about how Shrek is not a fairy tale. It's a cautionary tale, an example of how a woman cannot turn an ogre into a man, but he can make an ogre out of you.
Yo, what is going on, guys? It is Taylor the Fiend back again, and today we are taking a look at the Shrek theory. Don't forget to drop your comments, your thoughts, and let's jump into it.
Because she started as a princess, she had generational wealth, she could have had a pet dragon. And because she was stuck up there, no hobbies, no friends, the first person she meets is this moody ass stubborn ogre that basically negs her. She takes that as a sign to get him to like her, and she falls in love with him. He manages to get a princess to settle for him, an antisocial outcast, lives in a swamp. Isn't he also unemployed? She's thinking, oh my god, I got the loser to love me. Alienates herself from her family to live with him in a swamp, gets baby trapped. She's also an ogre now, so if she ever wanted to leave him, she's severely limited her potential dating pool. He's not willing to change anything about himself or the way he lives or to level up in order to provide for her and their family.
You don't need to be an expert in the nuances of the Shrek movies to know that this take is incredibly ignorant. The princess didn't turn into an ogre, she was always an ogre. It was the princess that was the facade.
Did I mention she lives in a swamp when she could have lived in a castle? People try to trick women into not caring about material things, but there really is a level that you need to care about when you're going to raise children, okay? Men can go their whole lives sleeping on the floor, but how are you going to raise children in that kind of environment? You could be the prettiest and richest girl in the land, and if you don't have a hobby and some friends, you'll end up in the swamp with an ogre, and you'll become an ogre too.
Overlooking the fact that the very same princess actually wanted to move to the swamp with Shrek, it's not wise to make a theory that bashes men based on a movie where the female dragon quite literally forces herself on a male donkey, but apparently that doesn't count.
If you guys have been living under a rock, there's this theory that's been circulating on TikTok about the movie Shrek, and it has the vapid, demanding, unaccountable broads in a complete tizzy, you guys. Essentially, the Shrek theory is basically posing Shrek as this kind of bum dude that brings Fiona down and turns her into a bum just like him. And there's so many issues with this narrative. I don't even know where to start. And excuse my voice, I'm still recovering. Your girl's been sick.
She frames the first movie as Shrek being like some type of broke bum, but because he rescued Fiona and he's the first man that she's seen in years, she falls in love with Shrek and ends up becoming an ogre. That's not what happened. Shrek owned land, he owned his own swamp, and then one day he wakes up and there are thousands of fairy tale creatures at his home, on his property. So he goes to Lord Farquaad, and in the process he proves that he's the most capable champion at fighting. So Lord Farquaad says, you will be my champion, you will rescue the princess. And Shrek's like, I don't want to do that, I just want these people out of my home.
You can tell that the women who want to talk about this put a lot of energy into making a theory based on a movie they have clearly never seen. They watch out of context clips that are 2 minutes long and use it as an excuse to hate men.
So Lord Farquaad says, I'll cut you a deal. If you go rescue the princess, then I'll make sure your home's exactly the way it was before all these creatures came. When Shrek rescues Fiona, they don't like each other. Shrek doesn't like her because he doesn't like people at this point in the story. And Fiona doesn't like Shrek because she feels like she's getting cheated out of the fairy tale that's been told to her since she was a little kid locked in the tower. They only start having feelings for one another as they're traveling because they start to find out that they have a lot in common, because a big aspect of Fiona's character in the first movie is that she does not fit the mold of a traditional princess. She's not a damsel in distress. We find out that she's a very capable fighter. She was really in the tower by choice. She could have escaped anytime she wanted to. She was just waiting for a Prince Charming. She knows how to survive in the wilderness. She's not traditionally girly or anything like that.
This brings up a good point about a lot of modern day women. They choose to live their lives locked up in their apartments, only going out to work and just waiting for their fantasy to come true. Then they get frustrated when they do nothing, and then of course nothing actually happens.
Then we get the big reveal that she turns into an ogre at night, and through her conversation with Donkey, we see that this bothers her so much because she feels like she has a societal standard to uphold. She literally says, how could anyone love me if I'm ugly? Ugly and princess don't go together. She feels like she has to break this curse, that her being an ogre is bad, that her, being ugly is wrong, because that is what was pushed onto her since she was a little kid, which we find out in the second movie, specifically her dad pushing that on her. So at the end of Shrek 1, when they confess to one another and the curse is broken, she ends up as an ogre. That's not because of what Shrek wanted. That's because at her heart, that's who she always was. She never identified with the fairy tale princess side that she was pushed onto her. She always identified with the ogre side, and that's why she ended up staying the way that she did.
The other thing to remember is at the end of the movie, she was quite happy with how things ended up. She had a loving family, she had a home to call her own, she was with a man who made her life better, but apparently none of that counts because she didn't get a castle or something.
It's also crazy how that original video framed Shrek as if he downgraded Fiona's life. Like, the original person went on to say that, like, oh, Fiona used to be a princess, she used to be rich. She's literally still all of those things. That's literally the entire conflict of Shrek 2. In Shrek 2, we find out that Fiona is the princess of far, far away lands, so when her and Shrek go to visit her parents, the king and queen, Shrek feels inferior because he doesn't feel like he's good enough for Fiona. He knows Fiona loves him, but he doesn't feel like an ogre is good enough for a princess. Which is why we see Shrek go on this entire arc to elevate himself so he can be good enough for Fiona. He finds his potion to turn himself into a human, he turns Donkey into a stallion. I think he became like a knight or something like that.
One thing to remember in this example, Fiona feels inferior and wants to level herself up to be the woman she feels as though Shrek deserves. However, some modern women feel quite the opposite. They feel superior to men and see an obligation for the man to level himself up for her.
But even after doing all that, there is a part of the movie where the fairy godmother tells Shrek that ogres can't have happy endings, and that if he really loves Fiona, if he wants the best for Fiona, he should let her go. And he does that. He literally leaves. The only reason he comes back is because he finds out that the fairy godmother is obviously evil and that they were not only manipulating him but also manipulating Fiona, and he comes to save the day. And at the end of the movie, Shrek is urging Fiona. He's like, Fiona, if you want to stay human, if you want us to live like this for the rest of our lives, we can do that. You just have to kiss me right now. He is urging Fiona because he thinks this is what she wants. And Fiona even says, she was like, you would do that? You would live as a human for the rest of your life for me? And he's like, yes, I just want to make you happy. And she says she wants to live as an ogre. She wants to live with the ogre that she married.
Modern women love to argue that they have freedom and independence while also complaining that they have no free will in life or want to leave things in the hands. It's a convenient way to avoid accountability.
This interpretation of Shrek really highlights an issue with modern women of today. They don't look for substance. They want surface level beauty. They want something that looks good rather than focusing on what actually is good. Because on the surface, you think, oh yeah, she's living in a swamp and she's an ogre. Oh my God, that's so terrible. What a terrible life. But if you look underneath the surface and you really examine Shrek as a character, he is literally the man. Like, let's be so for real here. We would all be lucky to be with a man like Shrek. Shrek owned his own property. Shrek was the strongest, toughest fighter in all the land. Shrek had an honor about himself. Shrek did what he had to do to protect the woman that was under his care.
When you think about it, Shrek is like the modern woman's take on blue-collar workers. Sure, he's skilled, hardworking, and loyal, but all of that is meaningless unless he's all of those things, as well as some form of meaningless prestige.
Even though that woman wasn't even his. When the movie was beginning and towards the middle, they're not together, but he is still protecting that woman from whatever danger comes their way. This protector, provider, he literally fits that role, but because he's not aesthetically pleasing to these vapid broads, then they're like, oh, he's a monster, and he turned Fiona into a monster. And this just goes to show that people are slow. It's not even a context clue. This is something that the writers of the movie make extraordinarily clear. Fiona wanted to be an ogre. Like, she wanted to be an ogre, but she felt like she couldn't be an ogre because of society.
If I didn't know any better, it almost sounds like these women are jealous of Fiona, And when you consider that modern women spend a lot of their time creating parasocial relationships with fictional characters, you really couldn't put that past them, in my opinion.
So it's not even that she was this dainty princess and that's who she was. No, she was putting on, she was faking. That wasn't the real her. The real her was the ogre Fiona, and that is who she truly was. So in the end of the movie, that is what she turned into.
The literacy crisis we are in is not only subject to reading. Literacy and lack of understanding, nuance, and comprehension also skews when it comes to how you ingest media. And this is the issue that we are facing when it comes to this whole Shrek is a cautionary tale think piece that has over 1 million people liking and agreeing, and thousands of people in the comments being like, you know what? I never thought about it that way. It's because you shouldn't think of Shrek as a cautionary tale, because that creator, unfortunately, is just loud and wrong.
Shrek isn't a cautionary tale. It's an animated film that pokes fun at fairy tale tropes, nothing more, but you can't really be surprised how many people think like this. When you are miserable, lonely, and have too much time on your hands, this kind of crap is just bound to happen.
Now, I'm usually not one to go that deep when it comes to animations, right? But since she wants this to be a very deep and woke conversation of taking it that deep and taking it a step further of, these are the things that we ingested as children that, have fried our mind. And there are a lot of Fionas walking around in the world. Actually, the point is that there's not, because Shrek is an antithesis of what fairy tales are supposed to be. If anything, it is a big you to Disney and their brainwashing of young girls of what you should look at love to be and what true love really is.
That's a good point. Disney films have filled some women's minds with this nonsense that everybody gets a happy ending with all of the prizes that come with that. But we all know life doesn't actually work that way. That's why it's called fantasy.
Now, she is purposely using the first and the fourth film to, I guess, support her truth in that it's a cautionary tale, right? I don't want to even focus in on those two movies. While they all have great plot points, I want to focus my analysis on not only the best film of the franchise, but probably one of the best animated sequels to ever grace our screens, and that is Shrek 2. This movie alone debunks her stance on that Shrek is a cautionary tale, because Shrek 2 actually gives us a deeper dive in the land of fairy tale, right? So as we know, in Shrek 2, it takes place right after Shrek and Fiona got married, after their honeymoon, and Fiona's daddy's like, I'm trying to see you, right? Like, Fiona's like, damn, my parents want to see me. So they travel to Far, Far Away Land. And Far, Far Away Land is essentially the Hollywood of the fairy tale lands, right? Like, this is Calabasas. So it essentially shows us that Fiona is that girl of the princesses.
You can't really be surprised that she would overlook a movie whose major plot point completely decimates her initial argument, but we all know that a modern feminist will go to absurd lengths to prove that she is right, even if it is actually quite embarrassing.
Like Cinderella, Snow White, like, her daddy is the ruler of the kingdom, which means that Princess Fiona is like the head of the princesses. And not only that, Far, Far Away Land is a great anecdote of just how vain and vapid and stereotypical Hollywood is, right? That fairy tales is truly rooted in appearance and not love and honor and bravery and all that other. It's just all for show, and it's essentially just like who can look the best, right?
Another interesting thing about modern women is how they are deeply infatuated with the glitz and glamour of celebrity culture. Even though we all know there's nothing actually glamorous about what they do, it can get quite repulsive and actually deeply disturbing.
So, we fast forward, Shrek and the daddy clearly don't get along, and they get into it. Why? Because Shrek, as Fiona's husband, is like, nigga, you locked your daughter up for years. You ain't call on her, you ain't check on her, you ain't say no carrier pigeon, you ain't did nothing to like see her for years. And now you pissy at me? I saved your daughter.
For these vapid broads to really pull that out of the movie to say, well, you can't turn an ogre into a man, but an ogre can turn you into an ogre. Like, girl, are you slow? Did you not see the second movie? Like, let's be so for real here. Did you not see the second movie? This ogre literally turned into a man for his woman. He turned into a man to be with her and was willing to give her up if that was what was in her best interest. So he was literally turned into a man.
The feminists who support this theory have to overlook that because the entire basis of their ideology hinges on this idea that all men are just evil oppressors. So ultimately, no matter what Shrek actually does, he must always be the villain because, of course, he's a man.
It's just like these broads, they really think they are so highbrow, so intelligent for these dumbass takes. If that is what you're getting from the film, it says more about you than the film itself. Because who the sees that movie and comes to the conclusion that Shrek is somehow the bad guy? That Shrek is doing a disservice to Fiona when he is literally doing everything y'all broads say you want. Protector, provider.
Shrek was not a cautionary tale, but I do think that video was. I'm honestly really excited because this is giving me the excuse to talk about monster theory outside of the concept of horror film, but let me slow down. Let me work up to it. And the cautionary tale being told there is, I think, that while obviously the media you consume and the art you engage with is not necessarily a direct reflection of your personality or your personal values, those things will inevitably be exposed when you analyze media.
We actually see that all the time with that whole literally me movement. There is a difference for being able to connect with a well-written character and then forcing your personality onto a person who quite literally doesn't exist.
So if you have some questionable things going on in your worldview, it's gonna pop up, even in something as seemingly harmless as a conversation about Shrek. Not that I think all film criticism or opinions on movies put out on the internet need to be phrased this way. I think there's room in the world for silly, goofy, fun criticism and hot takes on art. I think that's okay as long as it's done ethically and responsibly. But if you were to turn in an essay, right, about the movie Shrek, where your thesis or your main argument was basically that Shrek is a cautionary tale about how men don't change for women, they turn women into monsters. One of the first things your professor would expect you to provide is an in-depth explanation of how and why you are identifying Shrek as the monster in that film. And that's actually what I want to zoom in on here, because my issue with the take that Shrek is a cautionary tale about how men turn women into monsters.
The sad part is there's probably some feminist grad student out there who's basing her doctorate thesis on how Shrek is the villain of the story, and what makes it worse is how there could be some academics who think this is a good idea for a doctorate thesis.
Is not actually with the argument or the assertion that Shrek and Fiona are monsters. I think that argument holds weight for, at the risk of sounding rude, a lot of reasons the original poster may not have even thought of. My issue is with the reasons, the explanation, and the definition that person really puts forth of what a monster is in her view. A lot of this conversation so far, in my opinion, has been a conversation about like dominant versus oppositional reads. Even if I agree ideologically with what a lot of people just presenting the dominant read are saying, right? Like, I think the idea that that take is just incorrect because that's not what Shrek was supposed to be about is worth pointing out. I fundamentally disagree with approaching art that way, or the idea that there is one true or one correct interpretation of any film, particularly something that makes such heavy use of fairy tale symbolism as Shrek.
People are allowed to analyze media any way they see fit. There are countless channels dedicated to doing that. The problem with Shrek theory is how so many women get emotional about the whole thing. It really does actually just make them angry.
Calling Shrek a cautionary tale is an oppositional read, right? It is a read or an analysis of the film that focuses more heavily on that audience member's interpretation of the story over what the filmmakers may or may not have been trying to communicate. And I want to continue to reiterate that I don't think searching for dominant versus oppositional reading is a question of right or wrong. It's a question of being conscious of when and where you are presenting those particular reads and what it means to have an oppositional read. When you stop looking for the filmmaker or creator's intentions, we are now talking about you and your worldview, and that's not a bad thing. As a matter of fact, it's something the internet loves. The internet loves when people present an oppositional take about a film that makes them think differently or see it from a completely different perspective. I know, because that's what I built my platform on, at the risk of sounding arrogant. The problem with the take that Shrek is a cautionary tale is that is an oppositional read rooted in a worldview that is way more similar to Lord Farquaad's than I think that initial poster wants to admit.
You might as well call it what it is. It's just hate, pure and simple. It's not about some kind of sophisticated analysis of this particular movie. It's just another means to spew needless hate towards an entire group of people for reasons that don't even make sense at the end of the day. That's really what it is.
And this is another part of it. These broads will think for you. And this is why I struggle with female friendships. This is why it's very hard to be in community with a lot of broads, is because they want to think for you. You could be happy and content with a good man, and they will somehow find a way to try to tell you that he's not doing what he's supposed to do and you should ask for better. And you saw this with the whole Valentine's Day thing. Blunt Girlie, she did a wonderful video on this. I will link it down in the description. But you essentially had these broads over here complaining about roses on the bed.
Modern single women love to keep other women single. That is why they will sabotage relationships, they'll post toxic dating advice online, and they'll make other people miserable. Then it leads to crap like this where they rip into men for not doing anything right.
And it's like, for years, that has always been like something so romantic. But now these broads want to tell you how to feel about your relationship, about the romantic gestures that your man is doing for you. The woman in the video, she probably liked it. You saw she laughed. That might have been the vibe between the two. For him to write something like face down, booty up. That could be something that is within their relationship and she finds it entertaining, and she would probably write something similar to him if the roles were reversed, because that's their relationship. But no, you have broads online trying to think for her, trying to tell her this is degrading. You shouldn't accept this. You should raise your standard. Like, what are we talking about here?
The types of women who will lose their minds over stuff like this do it without any form of context. They just force their worldview onto women they don't know and will never actually meet, and it's all out of petty jealousy and bitterness at the end of the day.
Y'all broads really want to think for other women. These heifers are trying to think for Fiona, even though out her own mouth she says that this is what she wants. She wants to be an ogre. She wants to be with Shrek, and Shrek is doing right by her. To say that he baby trapped her is even crazier, because guess who wanted the baby? Who wanted the baby? Fiona did. And see, this also highlights another part. These broads infantilize themselves. They act like women cannot make decisions of their own. They act like the decisions that women make are somehow because of men. They want to remove accountability from women. So whenever women make a decision that they don't like, or that other women say they shouldn't like, then it's, well, see, it's the man's fault. That's why they have this whole framing of the ogre turned the princess into an ogre, rather than the princess decided to be an ogre. They want to remove your accountability, your sense of control over your situation, because if I'm unaccountable, if things are just happening to me, then I'm always a victim. And that's the problem.
It honestly proves that feminism is nothing but a series of massive contradictions. They are strong and independent, but also slaves to fate or the universe. They blame men for their problems, even though the vast majority of men leave them alone as per their demands that they have been making for years now.
And you see this with a lot of different communities, but right now we're talking about women. This desire to be a victim in every situation is sick. Why do you see Fiona as some type of victim? She has a family. This girl has a family. She can roll out to the kingdom anytime she wants. What are we talking about here? She has a man who loves and respects her, who fights for her, who will go out of his way to make sure she is happy. What is the problem here? And then these same broads will wonder why they are in failed relationship after failed relationship after failed relationship. It's because you passed up on your Shrek. It's because you did not recognize when you had a Shrek in your life and he was there to be with you, to be for you, to be a good man to you, or a good ogre to you.
The sad part is most of these women had their chances to get with good men, but for whatever reason, they pushed themselves away and tried to get with someone quote-unquote better. Now, of course, they're alone, they have nobody in their lives, and they refuse to accept that it is all on them.
You want aesthetics more than you want a real relationship. So that's why these heifers will vie for and try to get with a Lord Farquaad and think that that situation is somehow better. Some jackass who's going to put the protecting and providing onto somebody else so that it can aesthetically look good by being in a kingdom with subjects and all this other crap. This whole situation, it really reveals what women's priorities are. The priority is for things to look good, not necessarily for it to be good.
We see that when these women are constantly chasing after Chad and Tyrone, it doesn't matter that these guys are toxic, quote unquote, just so long as they look good, it doesn't actually matter. And if they do get something good, they throw it away and use poetic nonsense to try and justify it.
It's very surface level, and that's why I call a lot of these broads vapid. That's why I call a lot of these broads infants. They act like children, because that is the mindset of a child. Let me put it to you this way. I could hand a child $100 bill, or I could hand them 100 pennies. Guess what they're going to choose? They're going to choose what looks like it's more. They're going to choose the 100 pennies because it looks like it's more. Even though the $100 bill, even though it's one, it's worth more.
Modern women have made it very clear that their priorities are all surface level. They want the status symbols, the good-looking man with the important job, the luxury car, and the ring that costs an obscene amount. That's more important to them than actually having a healthy relationship, for example.
And that's the problem with these heifers. They will choose the 100 pennies over the $100 bill just because the 100 pennies looks like it's more. Y'all need to put some respect on Shrek's name, okay? We will not be having any Shrek slander over here. If you're a real woman, you saw Shrek, you know what I know. We all want a Shrek in our lives. For the single women out here, this message is for you, because I already got my Shrek, and I'll be an ogre any day with my good ogre man. But y'all, I am curious to hear you guys' thoughts down below. How do you feel about the Shrek theory? Do you agree with the delusional broads where it's like, yeah, Shrek is a villain and he turned Fiona into an ogre and ruined her life? Or are you literate and understand basic logic in a movie and understand that Shrek is literally like the best type of guy you could possibly be with because he's actually like a protector, provider, and he's emotionally intelligent?
The funny part is that the 100 pennies will be accepted because they have the potential to be shinier than a $100 bill, so therefore it's more aesthetically pleasing. If you would like to get early access to videos, weekly lectures, and case study breakdowns of human behavior, make sure you check out the members area link below in the video description. Otherwise, make sure to click on one of these videos on screen now if you enjoyed. Make sure you take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.